These are leaders of the nationwide youth organization that calls itself SDS, Students for a Democratic Society. It has more than 300 chapters on the college campuses of America. Its national and local leaders in convention here at the Chicago Coliseum, June 1969. Take the major credit for the rioting, mob actions, takeovers, and burnings on college and university campuses throughout the nation.
And finding out about the organization of SDS, we've always been quite willing to talk about.
We'll talk about socialism anywhere, in the streets or in the Senate, anywhere, you know.
SDS is not, and the movement in this country is not something that exists during the school year and is going to start up again in the fall, and that they have to worry about whether we're going to be in the streets in the fall. We're going to be on the streets and in every institution in this country from now on.
What would you put? We're going to replace capitalism with socialism.
There's a gentleman named William Ayers. He was part of the Weather Underground in the 1970s. They bombed the Pentagon, the Capitol, and other buildings. He's never apologized for that. And in fact, on 9/11, he was quoted in the New York Times saying, "I don't regret setting bombs. I feel we didn't do enough." An early organizing meeting for your state Senate campaign was held at his house, and your campaign has said you're friendly. Can you explain that relationship for the voters and explain to Democrats why it won't be a problem?
George, but this is an example of what I'm talking about. This is a guy who lives in my neighborhood, who's a professor of English in Chicago, who I know and who I have not received some official endorsement from. He's not somebody who I exchange ideas from on a regular basis. And the notion that somehow, as a consequence of me knowing somebody who engaged in detestable acts 40 years ago when I was 8 years old, somehow reflects on me and my values doesn't make much sense, George. This kind of game in which anybody who I know, regardless of how flimsy the relationship is somehow their ideas could be attributed to me. I think the American people are smarter than that. They're not going to suggest somehow that that is reflective of my views, because it obviously isn't.
Well, I think that is a fair general statement, but I also believe that Senator Obama served on a board with Mr. Ayers for a period of time, the Woods Foundation, which was a paid directorship position. And if I'm not mistaken, that relationship with Mr. Ayers on this board continued after 9/11 and after his reported comments, which were deeply hurtful to people in New York. And I would hope to every American, because they were published on 9/11, and he said that he was just sorry they hadn't done more. And what they did was set bombs, and in some instances people died. So it is, you know, I think it is, again, an issue that people will be asking about, and I have no doubt. I know Senator Obama is a good man, and I respect him, greatly.
I'm going to have to respond to this just really quickly, but by Senator Clinton's own vetting standards, I don't think she would make it, since President Clinton pardoned or commuted the sentences of 2 members of the Weather Underground, which I think is a slightly more significant act than me serving on a board with somebody for actions that he did 40 years ago.
When you run for president, especially looking forward to the general election in the fall, you know that everything is going to be fair game.
The Obama camp points out that in the closing days of his presidency, Bill Clinton granted clemency to 2 imprisoned Weather Underground radicals. We asked Hillary about that.
Well, I didn't know anything about it, but from my perspective, everything is fair game.
Let me say in terms of 4 men. Tony Rezko we've named. He's Syrian-born. He's been in Chicago a long time. He graduated from the Illinois Institute of Technology. There's a second name that's important here. His name is William Ayers. You used it. Billy Ayers of the Weather People. Not a casual acquaintance, but he's not Barack Obama's generation. He's more a mentor to Barack Obama. They've known each other at least since '95. Bill Ayers and his wife Bernadine Dorn were principals in Barack Obama's first run for the state Senate. In fact, they found a Meet the Candidate dinner meeting at their home in 1995. They've served together on a critical philanthropy in Chicago, the Woods Fund. They've given money to important people in Chicago. They know each other a long time. Bill Ayers was on the New York Times on September 11th, quoted as saying there was an eloquence to bombs. He's not an attractive character for a president to hang out with without answering what he learned from Bill Ayers all those years serving together.
Your theory that President Obama wanted this border chaos. Why?
Well, Megan, start by asking this. You have hordes of people who are showing up at the border, women and children with sick and hungry. Now, why is this happening now? You can't say it's because there's poverty and need around the world. Because there's been poverty and need around the world since the time of the Babylonians. So why is this occurring now? Are there revolutions swirling across Central America that are coughing up refugees? No, nothing has changed over there. What has changed is over here. The Obama administration for the past 6 years has been signaling that it's not serious about enforcing the immigration laws.
Why? Why would the president want this to happen?
Think of it this way. The main opposition to amnesty is the Republicans who I think very sensibly say, listen, if you want to discuss how we should deal with our immigration problem at home, let's first lock the border. You can't have a porous border and at the same time be debating the issue. Let's close the border, and then let's, as a country, get together and sensibly debate what do we do with the illegals who are here. Obama says, okay, how do I thwart that strategy? Now, one of the lessons of Obama's political mentor, this is the radical activist Saul Alinsky, was that, look, the American middle class is fundamentally innocent and decent, and you can always exploit the natural goodness of the American middle class for political ends.
In America, your film, you speak to the relationship that that President Obama may have had with Saul Alinsky, his ideas, and you have sort of a voiceover of a character that would be Saul Alinsky. Let's show a little bit of that.
It becomes a contest of power. Now, power has always gone into 2 areas. Those who have money and those who have people. We have nothing but people.
One thing I've come to realize is that any positive action for radical social change will have to be focused on the white middle class. For the simple reason that this is where the real power lies.
Do I make myself clear?
That's the actual Saul Alinsky. What is that showing us?
Well, what that's showing us is that what Alinsky is saying is that you can use, if you will, the power of people to just swarm, in this case, the border, and the American people will be defenseless against us. They won't know what to do about it. It's a form of social and political intimidation. I was at the border myself, Megan, not very long ago, researching this film. And I talked to a border guard, and I said to him, with all the surveillance that our government is doing of its own citizens, why can't we spot people coming across the border? And this guy goes, oh, we spot them. He goes, the problem is when we go to our supervisors and we tell them, look what we see on the camera, what they tell us is, move the camera. In other words, don't show the American people what's coming across the border. And that's a direct quote.
We saw the very same faces and their ideological errors in the 1960s when the radical left stepped out and moved from class warfare to promote their Marxist ideas into racist warfare and did the very same thing they're doing today. Students for a Democratic Society, Weather Underground, Black Panthers, I could go on. Faces like Angela Davis, black, Bill Ayers, white. Those two are still active today. They've been college professors. What was their promotion? Hardcore Marxism. Terry Tershey is former assistant director of the counterterrorism division of the FBI from 1994 to 1998. He directed the Unabomber Federal Task Force, his career at the FBI spanning 30 years, and in January of this year, co-authored a book entitled, in their own words, The Democratic Party's Push for a Communist America.
When we look at the Weather Underground, I was back in New York, in the FBI, Washington, D.C., San Francisco, served in all those places and worked counterintelligence involving the former Soviet Union, and then moved to terrorism. And along the way, learned a great deal about all these groups and started getting into all the things they had written in the manifesto called Prairie Fire, which the Weather Underground wrote in 1974. And what prompted our book, in their own words, The Democratic Party's Push Towards a Communist America, when you look at Prairie Fire, which is 180 pages, it was one of the last things the Weather Underground put out before they started running in a lot of directions because the FBI was shutting them down finally, is a strategy to essentially continue the revolution, to live to fight another day. And they said, we'll continue on for the next decade and we'll influence the educational system. We'll go where we can really hurt them in their own institutions. And eventually from inside those institutions, we'll come back. And this is the strategy we'll use. And they laid that strategy out. Today, even though the Weather Underground had thousands of people out committing bombings and hundreds of thousands they could depend upon to come out and protest, provide them the cover they needed to make it look like their issues were the issues of the day that everybody supported. Today, there are smaller groups of people, but what has happened is the self-described Weather Underground communist-minded men and women have essentially transferred their ideology of communism into the Democratic Party. And the strategy that they set forth back in 1974 in Prairie Fire is the exact strategy that is being played out today. There's about 6 points that are critical to that and that we look at in this book.
Yeah, two things seem to happen with the group. You see that pattern, by the way. If you notice, Antifa is horizontally organized so that if one part of it gets chopped off, the rest of it keeps on going. The second thing that happens, if you notice, there's always a breakup in these groups. These groups fight with each other internally, and Marxist revolutions devour their own sooner or later. But go ahead, let's pick the 6 points. I want to hear them.
Sure, and before I do that even, I just would like to piggyback on something you just said about the breakups. The Weather Underground emerged from a breakup with the Students for a Democratic Society way back in the 70s. And they wanted to pursue the violent part of the revolution in the streets of America, where the SDS thought they were going to be more benefited by quietly and stealthily pursuing the political part. So Today, if you draw a line from the SDS philosophical belief, you can draw it right into the Democratic Socialists of America. The Weather Underground, you can now draw into the rest of the Democratic Party. And these 6 points. The first one is capitalism. Capitalism to those folks was the enemy, and it had to be destroyed. So today, of course, when you hear AOC, who's a Democratic representative in our own United States Congress, say that capitalism is irredeemable, and that capitalism doesn't work, and we have to move away from capitalism, and you hear more and more Democrats saying similar things, then you know that the Democratic Party's platform and ideology now is lining up and is identical with exactly what the Weather Underground said. So capitalism is the first. They want to get rid of capitalism. They want to get rid of what provides people with the ability to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The second thing they want to do, they want to attack the Bill of Rights. The big thing with communism, of course, whether it's the Weather Underground or the Black Panther Party, they want to, in our culture, dethrone, I use the word dethrone God. God gets in the way of Gov, right? It's not going to be in God we trust, it's going to be in Gov we trust. And the bigger and more powerful the government is, the better for these people. And communism has no interest in having to compete with God. I think one of the things that really bothered me about the weekend and about the latest trend coming out of this is this whole thing of kneeling. People need to understand the symbolic nature of that and how that photograph is being taken out, how all these photographs of all these celebrities and sports stars and all these other people, that shot with Nancy Pelosi and her staff, the idea that you kneel, that's submission. And I was always taught, and I've actually heard it now in a couple forums where people are talking back, you're taught to kneel before God, not to kneel before government authority and not to kneel before somebody else who's telling you, kneel and do this before you can get up. Well, that's reminiscent of every major awful event of the past when the kings cut off somebody's head after they've knelt and given all their apologies in the hopes they can save their lives. But, of course, they're the first to get their head cut off. So that's a really bad trend, and I hope that somebody sees the light here. You cannot negotiate with terrorists, and you cannot submit to this kind of nonsense, because if we do this, and say we have what I think is a living nightmare, say Joe Biden gets in the White House, and say they sweep the House and the Senate, these same politicians now are going to be on the fast track to taking away the kinds of things the police need to quell these riots, taking away the ability of the police to act independently with the kinds of tactics that will work. And they will literally watch the next time our cities burn, and they will have no way to stop it. And this will get so out of control, and this whole thing will tumble into what a colleague of mine says, the abyss. Because as they attack the Bill of Rights, as they attack God, they're really attacking the rule of law. Because
if you've ever watched Chris Cuomo over on CNN, you may have wondered, how'd this guy get a TV show? Sure, he's got well-defined abdominal muscles, and good for him, but he can barely speak English. There are nights when Cuomo emits entire paragraphs that mean nothing at all, just pure gibberish, like pig Latin or dogs barking. It's kind of remarkable. Was this guy educated in the United States? Let's check Wikipedia. Wait a second. The entry says that Chris Cuomo went to Yale University in Connecticut. That can't be right. Yale has famously high admission standards. Your kids couldn't get into Yale, no chance. They'd have to be incredibly smart. Geniuses, really. Is Chris Cuomo a secret genius? Does he have some amazing talent that's invisible on television? Maybe he speaks flawless Urdu. Maybe he has a deep grounding in particle physics. Perhaps he can calculate pi to the final digit. Actually, no. Chris Cuomo can't do any of that. It turns out he has an even more impressive qualification. His father was the governor of New York. If you want to get into a top American college, it's best to have a parent who's a well-known Democratic politician. That's the most effective credential of all. And don't take our word for it. Ask Dante de Blasio, the son of Bill de Blasio, the incompetent mayor of New York City. There's no evidence that the younger de Blasio did remarkably well in high school, and yet, like Chris Cuomo, he somehow got into Yale. Once there, Dante de Blasio found himself surrounded by people just like himself, the thoroughly average children of other prominent liberals. According to press reports, that would include the offspring of at least 3 Democrats currently serving in the U.S. Senate: Michael Bennet, Amy Klobuchar, and Sheldon Whitehouse. All of them sent kids to Yale. Did you? No, but they did. Their colleague Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, meanwhile, is one of a stunning number of Senate Democrats who have sent children to Harvard University. Senator Bob Menendez of New Jersey is a Harvard parent. So is Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. Schumer sent both his kids to Harvard. Barack Obama sent one of his. So did former New York Governor Eliot Spitzer. The all-time record, though, must go to former Vice President Al Gore. Al Gore sent 4. Imagine that. 4 kids in a row to Harvard. What are the odds of that occurring in nature? Well, statistically, it's about as likely as getting hit by lightning every single day for a year. And yet somehow the Gore family pulled it off. Congratulations, Gore family. Andrew Cuomo, the sitting governor of New York, sent one of his kids to Harvard, but the other 2 went to Brown. That's also an Ivy League university that your kids could never get into. Brown is, as they say, highly selective, at least for the children of non-politicians. But for pure 200-proof exclusivity, nothing beats Stanford University outside San Francisco. You could live your entire life in this country and never meet a single person who went to Stanford. It's that rarefied. And yet here's the amazing part. Hillary Clinton's daughter breezed right in. How did Chelsea do that? Was it her formidable brain power? Well, you can check out her Twitter feed and judge for yourself. Now, there's a chance that Chelsea is intentionally misleading us. It's possible that her entire public persona is a kind of performance art, a subversive Borat-style parody of mindless lifestyle liberalism. If that's the case, Chelsea Clinton is utterly brilliant. She's the Jonathan Swift of our time. But it's also possible that Chelsea isn't joking at all. It's possible, indeed, it's even probable that she is every bit as dull and self-serious as she appears to be. In that case, not only is Chelsea Clinton profoundly sub-brilliant, you've got to wonder how she holds a paying job. How did someone like that get into Stanford? You might have the same question about some of the kids at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. Georgetown's alumni magazine is available online, so next time you've got a second free, take a look. You'll recognize many of the names inside: Biden, Pelosi, Kennedy. These are the children of famous Democratic politicians. Are they impressive, hardworking kids who deserve to be at one of this country's most prestigious universities? Possibly, maybe some of them, maybe not. Doesn't matter. In fact, it's irrelevant. They're the offspring of prominent Democrats. That's the point, and that's why they're at Georgetown. So how does this happen? Well, it happens because our meritocracy is a sham. It's fake. They tell you that only the most accomplished students get into these schools, but they're lying. Their friends' kids get first dibs, fellow members of their social circle, kids whose families can help them down the road. The children of sympathetic politicians are an obvious priority for admissions officers. These are the same politicians who funnel billions in tax dollars to colleges and universities every year. So letting a senator's kid into Harvard is just smart business. The quid pro quo is obvious. It's a kind of unregulated lobbying. Remember the varsity blues scandal in California where a group of socially anxious soccer moms tried to game the college admission system? Well, this is far more corrupt than that, except that nobody's going to prison for it. So how many Chris Cuomos get into Yale every year? It'd be nice to know, but we don't know. Like almost everything about higher education, it's opaque. Prestigious schools can pretend that they admit only the most qualified applicants because nobody can prove otherwise. The real admissions numbers are secret. They're hidden from public view, even though we pay for those schools because all of them take massive amounts in tax dollars. Elite colleges are like public companies that lie about their balance sheets. They're cooking the books to defraud shareholders. In this case, the shareholders are the entire country. A handful of elite schools form the gateway to success in America. If you go to Harvard, you're all but guaranteed to make more money over the course of your life than someone who didn't go to Harvard. It's that simple. And so when you rig the admissions system, what you're really rigging is American society. You're creating an impenetrable class system for your own benefit. And that's exactly what they're doing. You often hear progressives say that they worry about income inequality. They don't mean it at all. How do you know they don't mean it? Because if the left really cared about the stratification of American society, they would make college admissions transparent. They'd force Stanford, for example, to open the books and show the rest of us how exactly they're assembling this year's freshman class. That's what they'd do. And yet Democrats in Congress haven't done that and won't do that. They seem strangely incurious about how the process works, like they don't really want to know all the details. In fact, they already know precisely how the admissions game works, and they strongly approve. Why wouldn't they approve? Their kids are benefiting from it.
Thank you very much. We're making a lot of progress with the whole situation that came in from a place called China. You probably know, you probably see. But we have a little work to do, and we'll get it done. We're having some very good numbers coming out in terms of the comeback of our nation, and I think it's going very rapidly, and it's going to be very good. But right now we're in that process of building. It's all coming back. To further expand opportunity, I'm taking a bold action to reform the federal workforce. Today, I'll sign an executive order that directs the federal government to replace outdated and really outdated, it's called degree-based hiring, with skill-based hiring. So we want it based on skill. The federal government will no longer be narrowly focused on where you went to school, but the skills and the talents that you bring to the job. We want that skill to be there. We want it based on merit. We've looked at merit for a long time, and we've been able to get that done. And today's signing is a very, very important one.
So we're very excited about the launch of this private sector-led and driven campaign to match Americans with the training they need and ultimately the job vacancies that exist. Through our pledge to America's workers, the private sector has committed to investing in the training and education of over 16 million American students and workers, and this continues despite the vast change that the plague ushered in.
Education, and I so appreciate your leadership there.